Welcome to Inside Tacoma. I'm Alisa O'Hanlon. Joining me today is Jake Fey, representative from the 27th District in Washington. Hi, Jake.
Hi, how are you doing?
I'm well. How are you?
Good.
I am so glad to have you here.
It's good to be here.
You know, it's been 2 years since you've been on the show. Do you remember the last time you were on the show?
I'm not sure how the viewers had done without it.
A lot's changed in 2 years.
It has, that's right. That's right.
Yeah. Tell me a little bit about the district and the 27th. What neighborhoods and what changes have you seen in the last couple of years?
Well, especially in transportation, we've seen some great changes with the continuing construction along I-5, but also the movement of starting to do the construction for Link Light Rail from its terminus by Old City Hall down to hopefully up to St. Joe's Hospital. Mm-hmm. So that's a big deal. Sometimes it takes a long time. I remember when I was on the Sound Transit Board, we were talking about it, but it takes a while to get all the money accumulated, and that's happening, and that's great. And we've got some changes coming in terms of a new project off of I-5 into the Port of Tacoma as part of the 167 project around the corner. So things are happening.
Yeah, absolutely. So the other thing that's changed in the last 2 years is you are now chair of the Transportation Committee in the House.
That's right,
So last year was your first session in that seat. How was that?
Well, it was full of surprises. The first being that the decision was made because of the interest by members to increase the committee to 31 members. 17 Democrats and 14 Republicans. Most of those people had never served on transportation. Many of them were brand new to the legislature, so we had a bit of a learning curve to do. And I had a brand new ranking member, Andrew Barkus, who from the 2nd District, who took over being the ranking member. And so we needed to develop our relationship, our working relationship to get the work done, and that went very well, but it takes a little bit of time to get things worked out, get members oriented, and then to get the work done, the committee work done, because it was the House needed to produce a budget for the biennium, and so we did that, about $10 billion for the biennium, so we were very busy.
Yeah, well, because that was the long session this last.
That's right, and we're unique in the legislature and in fact in the country in that the Transportation Committee does both the budget and the policy to go with it. So it's a heavier workload. That's why it's good that there's 31 people trying to help get the work done, but it's a busy time for us during session. Yeah.
So what do you think were some of the biggest accomplishments for you all?
Well, for the district, I think it was advancing the 167 project, moving the schedule up 2 years.
And remind us what the 167 project
167 is to facilitate freight traffic where it now basically stops in Puyallup, where 167 terminates, and take that into the Port of Tacoma. So that's along with the improvements that are going to be made with 509 from SeaTac Airport into the Kent Valley, all about improving freight mobility and supporting both the Port of Seattle and the Port of Tacoma. So that's
huge both for our port.
It's a huge project, and it's between the two of them, several $1 billion, and it's very much needed in order to support the economy of, particularly Pierce County. We really rely on the Port of Tacoma and what it brings in.
Well, and even bringing things from east of the mountains.
Oh, yes. That's why it was well supported back in 2015.
So it's a number of revenue sources that put together our transportation network in this state. Can you talk to us a little bit about where it all comes from?
Well, we have the second highest state gasoline tax. It's just under 50 cents a gallon. The federal government hasn't raised their tax probably in 30 years. So we are very reliant on raising the money now.
Locally.
We weren't in the past when the interstate system was built, the federal government paid for 90% of the cost. Now in a growing state like ours, it really relies on tolling and gas tax, weight fees, in order to make sure that we get all the revenue to support the projects and get them built.
Yeah. And when we're talking about like 167, that not only is bringing the freight across the state, it's also bringing freight across the country. So the Port of Tacoma is
it's very intermodal.
source.
We're relying on the rail, and it's a very competitive marketplace. Canada has made a lot of investments to improve their infrastructure. And they are actually a little bit closer to Asia than the ports of Seattle and Tacoma. So it's important that we keep our infrastructure up to date and viable so that we can compete on an international basis.
Absolutely. So the state is working really hard to make sure that we're competing on an international basis.
That's true.
That's a tough job you're leading.
Well, it's a fun job because it is largely a bipartisan effort. I think it's recognized both by Republicans and Democrats in the state that we need infrastructure for the economy. We also need it for people to be able to do their daily chores of whether it's getting to work or getting around, getting their kids to school or whatever. So people rely on it. And so it's not a big philosophical issue, but except when it comes to how we pay for it. And then people have differences about how it should be paid for.
Tough.
Yes.
So what do you think some of the biggest challenges are ahead that you'll be tackling as the Transportation Committee?
So one is our ferry system. We made a commitment to fund one ferry and to commit to building 5 ferries in the next 10 years or so to try to upgrade a very aging infrastructure. There is interest, and we're going to see if we can make it also a more efficient and environmentally sound system by incorporating hybrid electric ferries into the mix, reduce our air pollution, and address carbon problem that we all face. So that's one issue. The biggest disappointment this last session was that we didn't have the ability to raise additional revenue to address the court case, the U.S. Supreme Court case, in terms of fixing the culverts that are owned by Washington Department of Transportation. And the tribal community rightfully sued to make sure that that would get fixed, that there would be salmon recovery, that streams would be open, and that we would increase our salmon yield. But it was a pretty heavy price tag. It's over $3 billion in the next 10 years. And so we weren't able to reach an agreement on that. So that will be at the center stage of going forward. And I guess the last big item is we're starting to work again with folks in the Oregon legislature to revitalize and go forward in replacing the Columbia River Bridge. So before it becomes a serious problem, the bridge is over 100 years old, but we've got to find a way to work with the Oregon folks to make that happen. So it's going to take a little bit of time, but it'll be a good challenge to see if we can make the improvements that are necessary there.
Yeah. So in those 3 items that you mentioned, the Columbia River Bridge, the culverts, and the ferries, one of the consistent themes I hear is the aging infrastructure. I mean, how do we keep up with that? That is such a challenge.
Well, it is, and there's an additional challenge because infrastructure ages partially because investments aren't made to keep those facilities up to date, right? And it's harder, quite frankly, in the legislature to convince legislators to vote for additional money to preserve the assets that we have. People like new shiny things, right? Like the 167 project. But it's a very underlying necessary thing, and when it gets ignored, then you build up the costs to bring things up to date again. So we're going to have to put additional funding going forward into preserving what we have to make sure that we don't get ourselves way behind and have failures in the system.
Yeah, well, I think a good local example is the bridge that the city of Tacoma with the Puyallup tribe just renamed the Fishing Wars Memorial Bridge.
Right. Yep.
It's across the Puyallup River where the fishing wars took place, and there were parts of that bridge that had deteriorated so much that the bridge actually needed to be closed. And that's certainly not a situation that we want.
No, I remember from my time on the city council, I think it's taken the city 15 to 20 years to accumulate the money to fix maybe a third of the bridge.
Yeah.
So we're going to have to look, when we do another revenue package, we're going to have to do some more work to make sure that we address not only state infrastructure, but local infrastructure that frequently is beyond the means of local governments to pay for themselves. And because we've had a diminished investment on the part of the federal government, it kind of falls on the state to step up. Because we rely on it, right? That used to be Highway 99, right? That used to be a state highway, and for whatever reason, the city took it over. And now it's got to get fixed, and it's part of the whole infrastructure related to freight traffic in and out of the Port of Tacoma.
Now, the other theme I heard in a couple of the projects that you mentioned, the ferries and the culverts, allowing fish passage, is an environmental theme. So you talked about clean fuels in the ferries. And so
So actually, I did a bill this session. I come from an environmental background, and I wanted to do some more things. So we actually passed a green transportation bill on the last day of the legislature. It was virtually the last bill passed, and that will make some improvements. One of the things that we're doing there is we're reinstituting the sales tax break for electric vehicles, and should hydrogen vehicles be a prospect in the future, that they would also apply to them. Putting more infrastructure together to make sure that you have not only the vehicles, but you have the infrastructure to support with charging stations. And we also had a new grant program for transit systems to be able to electrify their fleet. So we're trying to move in that direction as well, because that's where the future is. And as you know from your work, particularly in Tacoma, where we're on the threshold of non-attainment for fine particulates, it's not just about carbon, it's also about some very unhealthy air that is in our area that needs to get addressed, and that gets best addressed by moving from carbon fuels to electricity to fuel the vehicles that are needed for our economy.
Yeah. And the air particulates are a very fine matter in the air that can cause, especially exacerbate asthma and other breathing problems. And it's not necessarily just our industry, but also our geography is such that we're in a valley here in Tacoma, and the air settles and it doesn't move around. But recognizing that geography, we have to take different measures maybe than other places in order to ensure that our environment meets the same standards as other.
Particularly important for this community.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I don't want to get into it too deeply, but when we were talking about revenue for transportation projects, it seems like every election year there's something on the ballot about funding transportation projects, and I think there's an initiative again that may be coming up this year.
Yes, there's another initiative that would roll back car tabs to $30, and that would have a dramatic effect for road construction, because we base part of our revenue, people maybe don't perceive it when they pay their car tab, but we have weight fees. So the larger the vehicle, the more weight fees you pay, and that's part of the car tab. There's also charges from local governments to help pay for infrastructure in the local community. That's also on the car tab. And then there's sound transit taxes that are used to bring light rail in Tacoma in particular. So without that revenue, as it happened a number of years ago, it really puts a hole in the ability of local governments and state government to be able to do their job for transportation. So hopefully the impacts of those cuts will be more prevalent this year, and people will understand the consequences. A nice slogan, $30 car tabs, but there's consequences if that should happen.
Recognizing as taxpayers what we're paying for.
You are getting something for it, and you're getting something very local for it. It isn't just to pay for some projects in Eastern Washington. These are local projects that are very important.
Yeah, and you, as the chair of the Transportation Committee, you won't know what that landscape looks like until the election in November. So you're probably working now to think about what kind of transportation package and projects might be introduced next session based on one outcome of the initiative, but you also have to think about another strategy based on a different outcome.
Right. Well, that's part of the fun of being in the legislature. Not everything is a given, and it's not a static situation, and so you have to be able to deal with the things that are in front of you.
Yeah.
And I think we did a good job doing that this past session, and hopefully we'll be able to do that again, whatever the circumstances turn out to be.
Absolutely. So fun. What's fun in the legislature? I know you do other things besides transportation.
Yeah, so, I'm not the biggest jazz fan, but it was very successfully funded the last piece of funding for the studio downtown for KNKX.
Excellent.
And I was there taking a look at the project a few weeks ago, and it looks like in September they'll be able to open up that facility, and it'll be a great asset because they're going to be able to provide a connection for the School of the Arts, for the Broadway Center. That's going to be right there across from the Broadway Center, and so it's going to be a great opportunity for more for kids in particular to be able to have the tools they need to whatever they aspire to musically or whatever to partake in that. So that's a great project. We funded some more funding for the Broadway Center and for Tacoma Community House. So we do a number of capital projects every year between Senator Darneal and Representative Jenkins and I. We kind of split up the requests that we get and try to work those individually and collectively to help out the local community. And it's always an enjoyment to see those things actually come to pass. For a number of years, I think it was the first 6 years I was here, we worked hard to get the Eastside Community Center constructed, beginning with the money for the feasibility study. And it's great to see that come to a conclusion and for that wonderful facility to be located in what was pretty much a desert in terms of opportunities for kids on the east side. And so it's great to see things come to fruition and have the community partake in the benefits of that.
Yeah, one of the great successes of the Eastside Community Center is that before it was built, people would say that there was never any place of substantial size to gather for weddings or celebrations, quinceañeras, these things. Now there is the Eastside Community Center, and I'll tell you, every time I try and book it, it's fully booked. I can't get in. So
and it's a first-class facility.
It is absolutely a first-class
and that's what
facility.
The folks in the East Side deserve, is a first-class facility.
Absolutely, which is part of the district that you represent.
Right.
So, so you talk about the Eastside Community Center, and you were talking a little bit about the School of the Arts. I know you as someone, especially when you first entered into the legislature in 2012, right? who's been a champion for youth and doing things for youth, especially homeless youth? How is that? How do you continue to weave that into the priorities you work on?
Well, so when you're in the legislature, it's an opportunity, and I was told this before I got into it, to get into areas that you might not be your wheelhouse, so to speak, in terms of like transportation and the environment is. And early on in my career, folks from Columbia Legal Services approached me about homelessness, and particularly youth homelessness, because it's really a separate kind of situation, and where there's been a great need. So for 4 years, I've served on the Youth Homelessness Advisory Committee. I just passed that on to another member this year. But we did a bill a few years ago, the Homeless Student Stability Act, which provides money for local programming to support families, whatever that need happens to be, and also to provide more counselors in the school system to support homeless families. And it was modeled after work that the Tacoma Housing Authority did at McCarver Elementary. So it's been a great sort of heartwarming activity to see how that develops. I will be continuing to do that because it's always to work on that in terms of money, to make sure there's enough money to support that. But what I've learned was that most of the kids that become homeless in their late teens, early 20s are a result of a failure in the juvenile justice system to provide any kind of transition or services for those kids once they leave the juvenile system, and then foster kids. Again, there isn't something, although I worked on a bill to try to enhance that, and we're making progress, but kids are kind of dropped after they get to be 18, and there's not services available for the transition. So if you can imagine, I mean, if you have in a normal situation, you've got parents and other support systems for most kids that help them make that transition and help guide young people to make good decisions. In the case of kids coming like out of foster care, in many cases they're anxious to get out of that system because it's not always a pleasant situation for them. And of course, these are kids that have had issues in their life, largely as a result of a dysfunctional family. This provides an opportunity for if we can provide more services and more facilities. We're going to have a facility over on the east side that the Tacoma Housing Authority's worked on. If you can catch kids and give them choices and give them shelter and services, then I think they'll be able to make the right kind of decision for themselves and won't find themselves without a home, without employment, maybe without skills to be able to move forward in their life.
Yeah. Well, I know you spend a lot of time. You have to spend a lot of time on the transportation issues, given your position. Right. But legislators, you have a whole variety of topics.
Right, and it was an area that really wasn't sort of filled at the time that I got into the legislature, and because of my interest in youth programs and that type of thing, I was approached to see if I could be helpful, and it's worked. It's been very gratifying. Yeah.
Well, and that makes me want to turn to talking a little bit about housing affordability, homelessness, not only for youth, but we all know that that's a huge topic, the huge challenge these days.
Right.
And I know the legislature took on a lot of bills last session to try and address this issue of homelessness and housing affordability and attainability. What's going to happen this session? How are we going to continue to try and dig into that?
Well, I'm hopeful that we'll go back and take a look on the funding side. That we do need more facilities and we need services to go along with that. And first of all, you have to stabilize families and make sure that they have an ability to have a place to stay right? And can feel some satisfaction in knowing that there is a place for them. And then you can wrap around services for that. But for me, I think it's a capacity situation. We obviously do get affected by what the marketplace is doing. And that tells me that we need more government intervention in terms of providing the funding at the state and local level to be able to have enough capacity so that people have a place that they can go to. And I think we're still short in that regard, right? And it's not just a Tacoma problem, it's pretty much a statewide problem.
It is a nationwide problem.
Right.
And I know in Tacoma that the mayor and city council has adopted a strategy that looks at an overall strategy that looks at a variety of different individual strategies, and it's really working that whole array to, you push on this end and it's going to cause a problem that way. So trying to balance all that.
Yeah, I don't think we can end homelessness, because people will find themselves without a home for whatever circumstances, right? So, but what we can, I think, do a better job is moving people out of homelessness as soon as we can, and provide the support that they need so that they can have their dreams realized, pursue whatever occupation they might have or education. But you have to start with having a place to live first.
So I want to ask you one more fun question.
Yes.
And it has to do with your seatmate who always wears fun socks.
Yes.
So do you have a fun thing that you do? What socks do you have on today?
Well, I just have my blue socks. They're not boring socks, and actually we have fun with that, because I can't keep up with my seatmate, Lori. I don't know where she shops, but she does a better job at shopping. But I try to do what I can to liven up the internet with her taking pictures of my socks as well. So.
Well, you two do a great job of representing the 27th District with your socks and otherwise, and keeping the legislature lively. So.
Well, I think appreciate the comment, and I think every day we enjoy what we're doing, and we feel blessed to be able to represent folks in Tacoma. So.
Thank you. I want to thank you for being my guest, Jake.
Thank you.
I'm Alisa O'Hanlon. This has been Inside Tacoma. Thank you very much. We hope you tune in again.